Do animals have rights? Do we have any duties towards animals? And if so, how should the ethical concerns of animals weigh into our thinking about ethics? Peter Singer is a contemporary ethicist who is perhaps most famous for specializing in animal ethics. He argues that humans ought to have ethical concern for animals. And if we reason carefully about this, we would conclude that eating meat is wrong. He begins his argument by talking about speciesism. Speciesism is the privileging of one species over another species. Singer argues that speciesism is actually just a complex form of racism. Here is his argument against speciesism. Number 1, if a being suffers, there can be no moral justification for refusing to take that suffering into consideration. Number 2, if a being is not capable of suffering or experiencing enjoyment or happiness, there is nothing to be taken into account. Hence, sentience, that is, awareness or sensation, is the only defensible boundary of concern for the interests of others. Any other boundary, rationality, intelligence, is arbitrary. Why not choose skin color? Number 5, speciesism thinks rationality is the defensible boundary of concern for the interests of others. Number 6, therefore, speciesism is wrong. In other words, we are not justified in thinking that our species is worth any more than any other species. Singer goes on to argue that eating meat is an expression of speciesism and is therefore wrong. Here's his argument. Number 1, we have no nutritional reason to eat meat rather than plants. Number 2, hence, eating meat is purely for human pleasure. Number 3, eating meat rests on the meat production industry. Number 4, the meat production industry uses animals purely as a means to an end. Number 5, therefore, eating animals treats animals as purely a means to our end, pleasure. Number 6, we regard their life and well-being as subordinate to our taste for a particular kind of dish. Number 7, hence, eating animals is an expression of speciesism. Number 8, since speciesism is wrong, eating animals is equally wrong. Now, if Singer is right, then humans ought to stop eating meat. It's worth pointing out here that Peter Singer is a utilitarian. That is, he thinks that pleasure of any kind is the highest good. So, the pleasure experienced by a cow or a chicken is just as valuable as the pleasure experienced by a human. But also notice that his arguments don't purely rest on utilitarian principles. You don't need to be a utilitarian to buy his argument. Still, as a utilitarian, Singer is in a unique position to take a strong stance against animal suffering. According to Singer, the meat industry accounts for a large amount of suffering in the world. And in the end, he thinks that if we stop eating meat, a large amount of suffering would cease.